A standard of my youth was the baseball sermon. My beloved Rabbi Raymond Zwerin would get up in front of the congregation and expertly weave comparisons between the game and often the high holidays. Baseball is a sport where success is not defined by any one heroic moment, but a series of victories. One game of baseball very rarely means much in a total season. Even the best baseball player in the world misses as much as they hit. It's consistency, that not flash, that's what makes you a star. And even if you are some kind of baseball prodigy, guess what? The ball can and will still go over your head, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the reason why this sermon always worked, and it worked for years, is because these sports metaphors are immediately obvious in their application to morality, to tshuva, to sacred living. Life itself is rarely defined by a singular good moment, until, of course, sometimes it is. One bad year is not the end of your season. Consistency in ethical action and communal participation is much more important than one flashy play. And mistakes, errors, these things are just part of, quote, the game. And don't forget, in your life, the ball will go over your head, and you could never have caught it in the first place. I think, maybe, and I say this with all the love in the world, even with all of this wisdom and all of these excellent metaphors, I think that my childhood rabbi just sometimes wanted to talk about baseball. My hometown team, the Colorado Rockies, never made it to the World Series until long after I was no longer living at home. So this is the first time I am experiencing this. That the children are having Blue Jays Spirit Days, and the lifelong believers are getting to show off their devotion to those who are a little, let's say, newer to the fandom. That other sports teams are moving the times of their games so that no one has to choose between We the North and Want It All. Our city has caught baseball fever, and even the people in places you would expect least to get in on the action are here. For instance, did you see Herzl in our atrium wearing the baseball's hat, rocking his Blue Jays swag? And in case you missed it, on Monday night we'll be showing Game 3 downstairs on the big screen so you can come and watch as a community. It's so special to be in Toronto right now, to be part of this feeling, this special excitement that is in our streets. It's just, there's positivity, and dare I say, almost a sense of unity, which is so nice because so much for so long has divided our city and our country and our world. So just to have this little flash for a few days, for a few weeks, for this little bit until, please God, we're cleaning up a parade downtown, there's this nice sense of togetherness. We are on the same team. We are rooting for the same outcome, and it feels good. And in contrast to this wonderful feeling of being together, the very first story about humanity unifying itself, which is tucked away at the end of our Parsha this week in the Torah, is actually not a positive one. In Genesis 11, the Torah simply states these words, "Vayechi chol haaretz fa echat udevarim echadim." Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And from here on, we read that the people of the world, having repopulated since the generation of Noach, decide to build for themselves first a city, and then amongst the city, a tower. The Tower of Babel. Its tower will be so great that it will scrape the very heavens. Why? Why do they do this? We actually don't know. We only know that they want to make a name for themselves. They fear that their unified society will not last. And so they build the tower as a community project to keep themselves together. And God somehow senses that at the root of the success of building this tower is the shared language, the singular language that they all have. And God is upset with this. God scrambles it up, and the people of the world disperse across the face of the earth. Why? Why does this bother God? The Torah is not explicit, And when the Torah is not explicit, that is when our rabbis spend the majority of their energy trying to figure out the mystery. What is the subtext of this seemingly harmless story? Why wouldn't God want a unified humanity speaking a single language in a shared civilization? Because after all, is that not what we pray for in the words of the Aleinu? One day the world will be as one as your name is one? Apparently not. Amongst our rabbinic thinkers, especially in the late 19th and 20th centuries, there is a fascinating series of thoughts. And the first of these thoughts comes from the Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Alev HaShalom. He argues that when the Torah says, Vayechi chol haaretz sfa echat udevarim echadim, that the entire world had a single language and single words, that we are not describing a utopian society. These words instead describe the birth of empire, of an empire based on conquest. And he writes, and I quote, "This was enforced shared speech by imperial conquest. This describes the practice of the world's first empires. We have historical evidence dating back to the Neo-Assyrians, who asserted their supremacy by insisting that the language that was spoken was only their language, and it was only their language which was to be used by the nations and populations that they defeated." To Rabbi Sacks, this idea that everyone is speaking the same language is because they are being forced to, this is a shining red beacon. This is an alarm bell going off in heaven. In our history as Jews, and as our history of Canada, we know that controlling the language of a, quote, conquered population is a method and a tool for snuffing out culture, history, uniqueness. This, argues Sacks, is the cause of the great offense to God. God has, according to our rabbis, created a world where there are supposed to be 70 unique languages spoken by unique peoples. Humanity may desire to dominate their fellow and to homogenize what God has intended, but what God wants is a beautiful and diverse world. Empire may be our natural instinct, but it is the dignity of difference that defines human beings in the eyes of God. This is one of Rabbi Sacks' great teachings. He returns to it again and again throughout his life, that humanity should not view our differences as something to be overcome. We should view our differences as something to be richly valued. That Jews are like everyone else, because like everyone else, we're different from everyone else. The reason why God rejects the Tower of Babel is because it is attempting the sin of empire, to create a single way of life, a single culture, speaking a single language. And yes, that might bring unity, but it will also dominate, assimilate, and ultimately dehumanize the world itself. His argument was inspired by the commentary of a rabbi called the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, in his commentary called the Hamek Hadavar. The Netziv wrote in the late 1800s, and so his arguments and his focus is a little bit different than Rabbi Sacks, who wrote over the last 30 years. Where Sacks sees the sin of Babel as the sin of empire, the Netziv sees the sin of Babel as uniformity itself. Quote, uniformity of language becomes uniformity of thought. Colloquial English, by the way, backs him up. The phrase, "now you're speaking my language," means that, yep, we agree. And what's wrong? Once again, what's wrong with agreeing? What's wrong with being on the same page or having a shared consensus? Well, as with the unity of shared language and culture under empire, it's because of what we lose. Let's take a moment and look at the world outside our windows today, although more accurately, it's the world on our screens today, as people opt into the echo chambers of the internet. Are we actually better off for only hearing the news that we like, for only reading the truth that we agree with? Or has something been fundamentally lost, something fundamentally broken? When everyone agrees, we lose critical perspective. And without critical perspective, we lose the ability for self-reflection. When there is no self-reflection, there is no opposition. And when there is no opposition, you slowly drift into authoritarianism. There was nothing difficult or dangerous about this at first, writes the Netziv. They all just wanted to build a city. They all just wanted to build a tower. And the danger lies in the future. Having built a city, a man-made environment, the risk is that they are going to impose man-made uniformity on all who live there. There will be no freedom of speech. There will be no dissent. There will be nothing that can endanger the unity of the city. These words are prophetic. The Netziv died in 1893. It was only his students and his disciples who would see the rise of communism, of Stalinism, of fascism, and totalitarianism. Finally, amongst our three thinkers this morning, Rabbi Shai Held, who is still teaching today at the Hadar Institute in New York, adds his own commentary, also drawing from Netziv. He understands, especially as a New Yorker, and this is not meant to offend any New Yorkers amongst us, my grandparents, my parents are themselves New Yorkers, that when you build and dwell in a great city, a great metropolis, it brings with it a sense of anonymity. It brings with it a sense of anonymity. And anonymity is a danger that can only be experienced by a human being when you dwell in a great city. It is a danger that is compounded by uniformity, because when everyone thinks and acts together as one, and everyone is anonymous, there is no such thing as personal identity. Directly before we read the story of the Tower of Babel, we are deep in a, quote, boring part of the Torah, one of the genealogical sections of the Torah, where we discuss the sons of Noah and their family. Here, the Torah goes into great detail about the names and the lineages. And in contrast, the story of the Tower of Babel is completely anonymous. Not a single name is used in the entirety of the text. And there are no names, writes Rabbi Held, because there were no individuals. Anonymity brings with it a sense of tragedy. When we are no longer identifiable, we risk the threat of insignificance. Which brings us to the most famous midrash drawn from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer about the Tower of Babel, that during its construction, when a human being might slip and fall and topple to their death from the top of the tower, nobody took notice. Nobody cared. But if a brick were to fall and shatter, quote, the people would mourn and cry and lament, and they would say, "Where shall we ever find another that can replace it?" Often the value that is taught from this midrash is a warning against materialism, that a person suddenly becomes less than their product. But through the lens of the Netziv and Hirsch and Sachs, it actually is much more stark. In a faceless and nameless society, the very language to mourn a person does not exist. So Rabbi Held is arguing that the dehumanization of the person through anonymity, through uniformity, through domination, through assimilation, ultimately, this is anti-God. An attempt to root out human individuality is an assault on God. Jewish theology affirms that each and every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image. And when our uniqueness or our individualities are destroyed, that is when someone declares war on the divine itself. And this is why God undoes the Tower of Babel, says Held, because the greatest act of tikkun, the greatest act of repair that God could do to a world that was slipping towards anonymity and uniformity is to bless it with diversity, cultural, linguistic, geographical. But he also closes by saying, then in our striving to avoid uniformity, we shouldn't then turn and fetishize nonconformity. Because at the extreme end of nonconformity, we find things just as challenging. We find narcissism. We find extreme self-involvement. And that's not any better. As always, it is the golden mean, the middle, where humanity finds its sweet spot because, I quote, "We are relational, communal beings, and that should be treasured, and we are individuals, summoned to think for ourselves and act for ourselves." What does this have to do with baseball? This morning, I would actually turn and argue that supporting the Blue Jays as part of this great swell of civic pride is a great way of being part of that sacred, beautiful middle. Because across Canada and across Toronto, each of us can find a way to celebrate and cheer and whoop and woohoo, or turn it off, each in our own way. Some of you will go with large groups of friends. Some of you may even have tickets to the games. Others will watch at home in family gatherings. Some of you will come back here to shul, or you may even go and join the teeming mass downtown. And others of us are just going to smile and look at the people in their white and blue and be glad for their joy and appreciate that small part of us, this warm feeling of we are in this together. And that feeling of we are in this together is as real as we want it to be, and it's as real as we make it. And that sense of unity in our city is made all that much more beautiful by our individual freedom to express it and take part, or not. We are individuals, and we are a community. We are a people, and our Jewish people is very much, this week, part of this nation. Thank God for that. Shabbat Shalom.